Why feeding bears is worse than you might think. So 101, a grizzly bear, has had a long and productive life. In her first 20, but then, in the early 90s, she began eating garbage and pet food that had been carelessly left out by residents in a suburb north of town. Because of the risk, 10 years later, however, there was a drought in Yellowstone, and food became scarce.